to the second part of our series on managing technology and cybersecurity risk for the financial services sector. You can subscribe to our series by emailing us on risk@spector.ie, or if you feel that there's anyone else that you know that may benefit from this content, feel free to send on their email address to us. Okay, so part two of our series is building out an asset and a risk register. And what we find when we're working with new clients in particular is that this work is rarely done to a satisfactory conclusion. And the knock-on effects of not building out a proper asset register and after that applying risk and a risk treatment to it is that you're missing stuff. You're going to be missing stuff in your overall risk assessment of your business. So it's really important in the early stages that we focus on developing that asset register, pulling together the information from the technical information from all areas of your business, and then applying a proper risk treatment to it. Presenting today, I'm Mark Hurley. I'm the CEO of Spector, and joining me today is Aaron Nolan, who is our information security specialist. He leads up our compliance department here. He's also an ISO 27001 lead auditor. And as we discussed, today we're discussing the building the asset and the risk registers. So I'm going to hand over to Aaron now. We're going to discuss the next stages.
Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Today we're going to have a look at our processes in two parts. So the first part of today we're going to have a look at is the asset register itself. We're going to have a look at what is an asset, how we identify an asset. We're going to look at why we inventory our assets. And third and finally, we're going to have a look at how we go about gathering this information to create the asset register. The second part today we're going to have a look at is the risk register. We're going to have a look at how we go about analysing our risk, choosing our stance on the risk itself, whether that be accept it, avoid it, transfer it or mitigate it. We're going to have a look at controlling the security controls for each risk, and finally we're going to have an implementation plan to mitigate these risks.
Okay, so the principle here is pretty basic. This is all hard work. There's no getting away from this. It's not straightforward. Gathering assets will involve working with multiple vendors, working with different heads of departments in your organization. But we are focused today completely on IT risk. We're not focused on wider risk in your business or wider assets. Building the risk register, the critical part of building that risk register and treating the risk is all about one thing. It's all about the identification of the key risks in your business, being able to prioritize them. And then when we get into the next part of our series, it's about actually developing a plan to eliminate those risks or to offset them in some way. So what we're working on here really is, Aaron, what would you describe it as? The kind of the framework, the kind of the brickwork, the foundation stone.
Foundations before we address our risks.
Yeah, so this is really foundational. But it is a critical component. Now, hopping straight forward, I'm going to let Aaron take over again here.
So the first stage of the asset register is defining what an asset is. So the ISO 27001 definition of an asset is anything that has value to the organisation. Now let's think about that for a moment.
That's pretty wide, isn't it? I mean, anything that has value to the organisation, that cannot be everything in our world. So our focus is
solely
narrower.
Solely technical,
Okay.
But also more so of a quantitative nature.
Okay, so we're looking at technical risk only, and the headings there kind of explain everything from hardware down to outsourced services. But for you, Aaron, in that list there, what would you say is the most critical?
The most critical part of any organisation is mainly its data. It's a vital part of the organisation that has been gathered over numerous years. So backing this up and ensuring that it's always available is the most critical part for any organisation.
Yeah, so we're looking to protect data. Obviously, data these days is the new gold. It has enormous value. It's why companies such as Google and Facebook are so wealthy these days. It's what attackers are after. So in hacking attempts, they're not looking to bust up your servers and stuff.
Sell your data
They're
on black
looking to
markets.
garner access to it and peddle that data onwards. And financial services companies are about 4 times more likely to be
Targeted
by hackers
hackers.
than almost any other company. The financial services and healthcare, because the value of that data is intrinsically higher. So what we're looking at here in summary is that we're looking at what is an asset. It's anything in the business, but we're looking at technical assets under these headings. And this refers back to the thematic review for credit unions and another Central Bank of Ireland documentation as well, isn't it?
It does, yeah. So we're looking at the outsourcing there and ensure that backups are in place and the security controls are in place to protect these assets and specifically data.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what an asset is. But why are we gathering that information, Aaron?
Well, there's two main reasons why we gather this information into an inventory of assets. The first one is to actually perform a full risk assessment of our entire scope of our business. So if we do not know what the entire scope of our business is, how do we know what our risk is? If our asset register isn't full and complete, then we don't know what our risks are.
Okay, well, what I'm hearing here, right, is that you got to get that bit right. If you're missing assets, you're potentially missing risks.
Exactly, yeah.
And there could be contagion, sideways contagion within an organisation on a risk that you don't even know about.
Yeah.
So it's critical that the asset list is complete. But the second bit's the kicker, isn't it?
The second part of this is basically accountability. Every asset should have an owner. The owner is the person who's responsible for that asset, its upkeep, its maintenance, and the security of the asset in general.
Yeah, so we'll probably investigate a couple of different examples of that as we go through. But there's two things here, right? We need the asset register to build the risk register. It's the main reason why we build it to begin with. And the second piece is that every asset should have ownership and probably a rhythm for review, wouldn't you think? Like once a year it's reviewed. So how are we going to build that? I mean, for people listening in today, they're kind of going, that's all well and good, but where do I start? How would you go around building that? Or who would you talk to?
There's many ways, different ways of doing it. The first step will be discovery tools. So if you have an outsourced IT provider, these guys should be able to provide you with a full asset register of anything in your organisation which has an IP address. So your IP addresses come from anything at all, from switches, firewalls, endpoints, mobile devices.
And you think about things like CCTV, so your IT guys mightn't provide a CCTV system, but you would incorporate that also.
Yeah.
You might need to talk to multiple vendors.
You know, your operations department, anything of that sort.
Yeah.
It's not a one person job, it takes an awful lot of people. The second one is HR. HR should have a list of all staff, their roles, their responsibilities, and that way we can get accountability. And these people in these roles should know more about their area specifically.
Yeah, very good.
And the most important part here, I believe, is the interview and the department heads. This could be a discussion around the table, just brainstorming, doing spider diagrams of what information they have, what they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and what they are responsible for, or they believe they are responsible for.
In our experience of it, and in Aaron's more in particular, because he does more of this work than I do, this is where huge amounts of information start spilling out of the table. You start asking people, okay, show me what you do, what you use, how you do it, and we often find very interesting stuff here. You also get a much deeper understanding of what people believe their risks are and different views of risk from within the organisation. So that's a massive part of it as well. But the last part is the bit that where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? It's every asset
must have an owner.
Must have an owner. If there's no ownership, there is no responsibility. And what we see a lot of reports, IT security, recommendation reports, including pen tests and stuff like that. And quite often they will have recommendations, but they're never acted upon.
Yeah.
And the reason why they're not acted upon every single time is accountability, without exception.
There's no accountability there, and there's nobody looking after it there. So you may have a asset inventory, but it might have been done 3 years ago, so it's not up to date. So therefore, it technically isn't done.
So your asset inventory would be an inventory of hardware, of software, of critical systems, infrastructure, services. It would be people.
Yeah.
It's everything. So when we look at risk register later on, we'll give you a flash of our risk register. It's live. And we'll also give you an output. We've downloaded a risk register from the internet for you guys, so you can go off and have a look at it. But think people, think critical people in your business as well. Think processes, think systems. It's everything. And that summarizes how to build your asset inventory. It involves people, not just yourself. What I would say is try and get a template together that allows people to fill out that template so you can harvest the information in a consistent way.
Should be a consistent manner, so everybody should be working off the same hymn sheet, basically.
Yeah. And there's no better time to do that than when you're sitting down in a round table environment. So that would be our tip there. Now we're moving into the area of building a risk register, and why we build the risk register and what its potency is in the business. For us, this is the cornerstone of all risk activity and all risk mitigation activity that comes from this.
Yeah. At this stage, we should have a full understanding of the scope of our business. We've done our asset register, we've inventoried all our items, so we should know what the boundaries of our organisation look like, and we should have a full, complete list of everything within our organisation.
Okay. Onwards and forwards to the development and building of the risk register itself. Like I say, during this process, we're going to give you a bird's eye view of a risk register, give you an idea of what it looks like. Now it's complicated. There's no getting away from it. But moving on, the importance of the risk register is what, Aaron? I mean, like, what are we trying to achieve here?
As risk is subjective, everybody's view on it is different. Even within organisations, people's view on what the risk is. Your IT department might find a risk to a server high priority, where you may not find that high priority at all. So to have everything on a register and look at it from a bird's eye view, from a top level, to see where your risks are as a business, not just as a department, it's key.
So the outcomes there are like, I think it's really important that it's an organisational view and not a kind of a siloed departmental view. But once we understand that risk, what's the outcome for these guys?
So once we've analysed our risk there, we can basically accept our risk if we all find it acceptable. We can avoid our risk by stopping it altogether. We can transfer our risk through cyber liability insurance or some sort of type of insurance, or we can look at mitigating our risks by implementing controls, mainly security technical controls, but that would have to be cost effective. There's no point implementing a security control if it's not cost effective, if it costs more than the actual damage that it will happen.
Yeah, so essentially what we're getting is really how to treat it, first of all understanding the risk, how to treat it, and then having a mitigation or having a plan to address those risks, right?
It's vitally important here to understand that this is a path. It's not a one-stop shop that we're going to lash into it and get done straight away. It's a process over time.
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, the importance of the risk register is it identifies the risk and gives us a plan of action, how to address it. Now, risk assessment methodologies, right? Qualitative versus quantitative. What's your preference, Aaron?
Quantitative would be my preference here, because we can score it, we can report on boards on it. It shows improvement over time. Qualitative is very hard to score and show improvement. Although we look back at what assets are, we look at people. We can't really put a quantitative figure on people, so we need to be smart about this.
Yeah. But as Aaron says, quantitative makes more sense because, to some degree it makes more sense. It makes more sense in our world because if you have a score, let's say my score today is 45, and I say at the beginning of the year I want to target 65, I can show progress from 45 moving forward. And when you've got a limited time span in which to inform your board, it's a very effective tool, like a scorecard. The next point, though, is one method for the organisation. We have several times come across a situation where different departments are gathering their stuff in different ways, and it's a mess.
Yeah, it's not cohesive whatsoever. And again, everybody has their subjective view on risk and their own risk, but as an organisation, it's just not cohesive.
So it comes back again to templating, right? Get the templating together and then share that information and round table your treatment and how you plan to address that methodology. That's really important. Get the staff on the same page. Ask each other questions about why. Why do you think that's a low risk? We consider that a high risk. And then, tease it out. So,
Yeah. If you're a small to medium organisation where you have less than say 50 people and 50 assets, computers, stuff like that, it's good to have it all in one place. But if you're a larger organisation of 100 plus people, you might need to break it down into departments with, say, the head of risk looking after each section or each risk assessment.
Brilliant. So when we analyse risk, I think you've alluded to this already, is that the reason we're doing it is to identify potential issues, threats and vulnerabilities, right? That's what we're looking at. So potentially what could go wrong. So server could die, it could just go through a wobble, it could, any number of things could happen. So you need to identify each of the risks that you have and what could happen. What's a control?
A control can be security controls, will be technical controls. There could be administrative controls.
So an example, let's say a control would be, let's say a backup procedure.
Yeah, that would be classed as a technical control.
So that's a technical control, and an operational control would be like the fact that I have a plan that it's affected by somebody. Somebody might verify that the backups are working.
Yeah.
And from a management perspective, we'd be looking at something like a backup policy.
Yeah.
So the three different levels there which kind of form the control, aren't they? Management, operational and technical. And that could be complicated if you had several hundred assets. But you don't have to employ controls every time, do you? Because you have options here.
Yeah, you have options there to what your stance is on these actual risks. You can go straight out and choose to avoid the risk altogether, but stop doing it. You can also accept the risk if you feel that it isn't applicable or it's not going to damage your company in any way. Your other option is to transfer the risk. It might be a risk, it might happen, but you might be covered by liability insurance. Or your final option is then just to basically put a control in place to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, so what we have are two different types of risk here. We have inherent risk, which is the risk in advance of treating it, and then you have a residual risk, which is after you've treated that risk or you've accepted it. The transferal of risk is an interesting one, and Aaron alluded to liability insurance. Modern cyber liability insurance policies are going much broader now. So they offer legal advice. They offer
emergency response.
Yeah, emergency response, PR advice, 24/7. So it's well worth. I mean, I know that certainly that Hiscox are launching a new product in June this year. It covers a huge amount of cover for potentially damaging outcomes, and well worth looking into for sure.
So this covers the risk analysis part of the process. So we're moving on to the risk treatment. So within risk treatment, we have to be smart here. Anytime we have chosen the option to treat a risk, we must make sure that there's a cost benefit there. There is no point implementing a control if it's going to cost more to fix it than it is to implement a control.
There's a good example here. We hear a lot of people looking for 24/7 security management, and that's expensive because you're paying per endpoint, paying per device on a 24/7 basis. But you may not need to cover the entire spectrum of your entire organization. So you might want to do all your PCs, but you might want to cover critical servers and your firewalls and stuff, where you can get a real sense of the pulse of that. Alternatively, you might just say, well, listen, I don't need 24/7. I'm a small business. While I do need to know what is going on, I think that small percentage of risk is too costly for me to address. I'll address it in different ways.
So when we choose to treat a risk, there's certain things that we have to look at here. We have to make sure that there is a budget in place to implement these controls. We also look at when it's going to happen. We have lists and plans in place to ensure it happens, but also that we have the resources there, the people, the time, the experience, the training, the knowledge to implement these controls and manage these controls.
So bring this back again to the thematic review for credit unions, or bring it back to the central bank documentation on risk mitigation. And the top line of that, the top recommendation there is around governance, right?
Yeah.
It always swings back into governance, and governance is what drives budgeting, what drives project, what drives resourcing, etc. If you don't have top level buy-in, this is a turkey.
It's not going to work.
It will never fly. So moving on from treatment, so we have the risks identified, we have them, how we're going to look after them, and now we're looking at treatment. What happens next is, like, what does our implementation plan look like? So Aaron, what's next here?
At this point, we've chosen the controls which we're going to implement in our plan. So we need to look at what is the most important, what is vital to our business, and what can be put on the back burner for the meantime. So we prioritise our treatment. So we should have a list of priorities. Anything that is business critical needs to be looked at first. Anything that has critical data or causes a risk to our business in terms of legal or compliance regulation, we must address first.
As you see it there, critical risks first, budget comes second, reporting back and updating a risk register are really important. This is challenge, can be challenging because a lot changes, but once the register is built first, it should become simpler. But building risk into the organisational fabric, I think that's an interesting one, because now we're talking about building a system, right? We're not just talking about a one-off event here.
It's not a one-off event, no.
It's never a one-off event, and I think part of our practice and part of what we do is we bring that kind of systemization and that discipline to the table, the calendarizing of events and stuff like that. And how often do we see that just falling apart?
It all falls apart because at the end of the day, nobody's put in charge of them. There's no owners and assets, and basically there's no accountability, and that's the main reason why risk falls through the cracks most of the time.
Yeah, so your risk implementation plan is more, it is about the identification and the treatment of those risks and everything else, but it's also about the beginning of building a kind of an ongoing system, which is critical in terms of evidence gathering, in terms of preparation for audit as well, isn't it? I mean,
you might have something in place, but it hasn't been addressed in 2-3 years. Therefore, in most auditors' eyes, it's not in place. It's not kept up to date, so therefore it's not live.
Yeah, audit is, Aaron, is what we call a black and white world, is it not?
Yes.
It is black and white, and no one is more black and white than Aaron, like he says. Now what we're going to do is we're going to dive in to our risk register demonstration. And what we have here is we have our risk register, and our risk register is 27001, an ISO 27001 treatment of risk. It is quite complicated. We're going to share some documentation with you about how to build that. We're also going to share with you an actual register, which is a dummy register. You can download them after. Now that's difficult to see, but I just want to focus first of all on the risk assessment, the different headers. We talked about assessment, we talked about treatment. So here's our risk. This is the inherent risk. This is the treatment that we're going to apply to that risk in order to get a different result, a residual risk, an outcome risk, if you want to describe it as that. Zooming in to our risk assessment here, just to the risk assessment component, we're looking at a particular business system in our organisation called ConnectWise, which is really our ERP system, isn't it? It's like our ticketing, our projects, our billing, it's everything really to us. Now, I'm going to hand this over to Aaron just to discuss the threat elements and the vulnerability elements that you see here. So when we look at it, when we look at an asset, Aaron, we look at it through the prism of three basic outcomes here, threat outcomes, which are the total loss of the system, a partial loss of the system, or that there's some kind of security incident, right? So can you explain that to us in a little bit more detail?
Okay, so we're looking at our ConnectWise asset here. So the first one is a total loss threat. So if ConnectWise was to go down, what would be the consequences on our business? How would we run day to day?
Yeah, so it's massive. If ConnectWise goes down for us, the consequences are high, and like they're very high, because it's very hard for us to continue to do business. So we've got different vulnerabilities here. Like we could lose access to our data center, or that could blow up. Very unlikely, but we have it in 2 locations, so we do have failover there. We could lose a server. It's never happened to us, but it has happened to clients of ours, so it does happen. or we could end up with a virtual server issue. So you can start to see that an asset, just one asset like that, there's loads of different potential vulnerabilities here.
We try to look at it from a CIA model, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we're looking at confidentiality there. So if someone gets into it, security down the bottom there. If someone gains access through access control, it'll be it's a high consequence. It's highly unlikely because we have multi-factor authentication on it. And we look at it through integrity. So then we're looking at data corruption. Again, that would be a medium consequence for us because we have backups in place, so we can just roll back. And then we look at availability. So availability is the top there. So if it goes down, how do we gain access to it? Is it always going to be there? It's a high consequence.
Yes, so what we're doing, we're looking at the consequence of something going lights out, which is high in our situation. It's a big problem for us. The likelihood in our situation is that it's medium or medium low, I would say. But the overall culmination is that the risk is high there because what we're doing, we're accumulating these two values here, that the value of 5 and 4 are high and medium. But the overall risk is high, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, we have to mitigate it, right? We have to deal with it.
Yeah, we have to choose our stance on that risk.
So our stance here is to mitigate. And as I roll forward, what are my options here? So I'm looking at how do I treat that risk at this point. Now in this situation, we're failing over to our disaster recovery environment. Yeah.
Yeah. So if our data center goes down, we have a server back here in the office which we fail over onto.
Yeah.
So again, the consequences are high if it goes down. The likelihood of it going down are quite high as well. So we've chosen to bring it all back in-house. So we have redundancy here in-house to ensure that this risk is mitigated.
Yeah, and from an audit perspective, what would an auditor be expecting to see here? Not only the plan,
but also the proof.
But proof, the testing. And when we talk about risk treatment, there's one thing saying that you're going to do something and there's another thing doing it. So we'll be talking about evidence gathering in part 4. Part of evidence gathering will be, yes, I did it, and here's the documentation to prove that I have done it. So it's not just about treatment, it's about treatment plus evidence at the end of the day.
At this stage of the process, we will gather a list of all these items that we need to address, and then we will prioritise them.
So moving forward, once we treat that risk, and we have treated it here, we're ending up with a different situation, aren't we? The consequence, likelihood and risk has now gone to medium, so we've gone from a high risk situation to a medium risk, but even that's been mitigated. Yeah. We have a failover plan.
So the failover has ensured that our consequences of not having redundancy there is lower, so we've gone down. The likelihood of it happening has gone down as well, and then the residual risk is gone down to 6, but we've accepted it because it's highly unlikely.
Yeah. So that is one asset. That is a core business system, and looked at through the prism of a couple of different threats and vulnerabilities. We apply that to all of our business systems. We apply that to everything. So that could be, in your case, it could be an Office 365 installation, but it's not limited to systems and to software, is it? I mean,
it's our entire asset register there. So
it is. So what we have here is we have all of the different systems in our business, everything from telephony through to desktops, servers, actual hardware, etc., etc., etc. And one bit that tends to get forgotten about is people, right? So we also have here I am, they've got me dead already, death lever. So if that happens, it's a high risk. How do we transfer that risk onto somebody else? So you can have key players within your business, and you need to address that. Address the risk of a key player leaving or becoming terminally ill or ill for any period of time for that matter.
You need some sort of succession plan there in place.
Yeah.
If you're CEO, CFO, or somebody at a high level.
That's my homework for my holidays is to build my succession plan. No, but in truth, the risk assessment really does need to cover everything. But look, we're not going to linger on this. We're going to give you a sample risk register. We've just downloaded it from an ISO website for you. You can work at this yourself. It is complicated, is it not?
It is, and it's very time consuming.
It's time consuming, it is complicated, but if you do it as a team effort, it is much more straightforward process of addressing the risks. If you feel like you're under time pressure, you can evaluate your complete risk based. focus on what's most important to your business first, and then put it into the schedule to revisit it. That would be the way to approach it, right?
That'd be the best way.
Okay, so that wraps up the risk register demonstration. As discussed, we have two documents. We have an ISO document supporting how to build the risk register, and we also have an ISO, it's an Excel-based format with sample data in it, so it'll help you kind of build the picture of the risk register. And remember, assets first, risk registration second. If you can complete it, complete it. It's money and time well spent, and it is most commonly the place that is jumped over. If you don't do it first, the outcomes look like what, Aaron?
It's bad. You don't understand your risk, and it's pointless.
It's incomplete. And in our world, particularly when it comes to audit, particularly when it comes to an audit situation, risk registration is critical. So, part 3, what's coming up next? Risk management is an ongoing process, not a race. This is a mantra that we commonly come back to, and it's really important. But what I would say, the risk registration part and those elements are really important. You know,
having a plan, having a schedule, having it documented, have it calendarized is vital. Again, we don't have to do it all at once. Once there is a plan in place.
We make it akin to spinning plates. You get the first plate up, it's a little effort after that, get the next plate up and the next plate and the next plate. So building a system, and we will be talking about that next. Gathering evidence. So actually gathering evidence that you're doing what you say you're doing. So stuff like, backup verification testing, stuff like verification of security posture, harvesting information about policies.
All of this stuff is vital. If you were ever to get audited, that would be the first thing the auditor looks at. They don't mind that you have a policy in place. They don't care that it's wrote down somewhere. They want to see it, proof of it. They want to see it live, or they want to see a screenshot or a screen grab of it. And the best place to have them is in your policies and procedures.
Yeah, and then we've got change management and how to manage change in the organisation. So any changes to critical infrastructure or core business systems, or maybe how you market your product even, should all be washed through the risk register. Everything needs to be added, every change needs to be added.
You should be aware of any sort of changes to your business or your core business functions. Even if you outsource that function, you should be aware of it and you should risk assess it.
The last part is the bit that I like the best, because this is where you start to see the impact of all your efforts. Clear reporting, both from an operational, and when I describe it operational, I'm talking about detail. I'm talking about control level detail, verification, evidence, but also senior management. Like, what do they want to see? They want to see, like, okay, well, what are our current risks? What are we doing about them? What projects have been committed to? What have we done to improve our posture? And then action plans and developing that maturity life cycle. This is what, now that you've got all the hard work done, it's just a case of keeping it there. And like I said before, I mean, we have a full system to manage this on behalf of our clients. We do it for nearly 40 clients already, and it works. We perform multiple audits, external, internal, comptroller, auditor general, all types of audits, and they rarely linger too long in our world because we're well prepared for it.
Policies and processes are in place, it's scheduled, it's calendarised, and they normally just walk by us when they come in.
Yeah. So look, that's it for this session. Many thanks for listening in. If there are any queries or requests, please just send an email to us on risk@spector.ie. And thanks once again for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much.